Well, good morning, everyone. Good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another Radical Feminist Perspective brought to you by Women's Declaration International. And this is a women-only webinar. These webinars are run by radical feminists whose voices have been canceled or silenced, and we have a great time every week. So glad that you are here. Today, we are discussing Gail Dines' marvelous book, Pornland. And we wish that Gail Dines was here, but she couldn't. So I'm Lierre Keith, and my co-host today is Helen Pringle. And Helen, you wanted to say a few things about Gail to kick off. So the floor
Yeah.
is yours.
Thank you. Usually I would say that I'm coming to you from Gadigal land in Sydney, but I'm really happy to be coming to you from the land of Calcutta in India, where I'm at a conference. So if there's any problem with the connection, that might be it. What I wanted to do was to, first of all, to just introduce Gail to everyone. Gail unfortunately can't be here. We're really sad that she can't, and it'd be great if she were, but just to give you a sense of who she is. I'm not sure that everybody's read the book, so we're kind of assuming that people have heard about it, but probably might not have read it. And some people will have read it, and you can get up and get a cup of tea at that point. So Gail Dines is the author of Pornland, which is the book that we're going to be discussing today. The subtitle is How Porn Has Hijacked Our Sexuality, published in 2010. Gail was born in and educated in England and was involved in feminist practice through volunteering at a rape crisis centre in Israel. She arrived in the US in 1986 as a professor at Wheelock College in Boston, where she was professor of sociology and women's studies. She's left the position now to work full-time in practice on pornography. So she's been doing research in the porn industry and pop culture for nearly 40 years. Some of the earlier time she worked with Bob Jensen, who is then professor at the University of Texas. Gail has always been an activist, but she's now full-time as that, and she helped to form the group Stop Porn Culture in 2007. I'll just briefly outline the goals of the organisation are to develop educational materials that raise awareness about the effects of living in a porn culture. SPC, Stop Porn Culture, comprises academics, activists, anti-violence experts, students, parents, and people concerned about porn's impact on the culture. It has presentations and slideshows, which are and I thought this was pretty remarkable, which are shown across the country in the United States, as well as in Russia, the Congo, England, Scotland, Ireland, and Australia. I met and interviewed Gail in Boston in 2011, around the time Pornland was first published. She's a person so full of energy and so full of enthusiasm and passion for what she does. She's really somebody that not only says things that are really important, but she also presents them in a way that I think really gets people in and makes them think, or not everybody, but gets a lot of people in and makes them think about this issue. Just briefly, Lierre is going to do a presentation, but I just wanted to say this is really a book about the pornification of a culture. So one of the things that I noticed when I was becoming anti-porn, and I haven't always been that, was that the typical way in which the problem of pornography was set out, was in terms of, and it was a more philosophical question, I suppose, but it was framed in the terms of, does a man, and it was a man pretty much always, people didn't think that women use pornography and they didn't think they should, and that this an individual man or boy reading a magazine, at night in a darkened room, and the mother bursts in the door, etc. Gail notes that one of the things, many people when they think of porn still think of a Playboy centerfold, especially depending on their age. They think of a soft focus shot of a woman with a finger or a lollipop in her mouth. And the porn industry no longer looks anything like that. You'll notice that that sort of picture of what pornography looked like was as a magazine. And the very idea of reading pornography or consuming pornographic magazines or even videos seems quaint. even when Gail was writing this book, the new nation of Pornland had been founded. Actually, not a new nation, but a new world, an alternative reality, one that leaks into our everyday lives in very alarming ways that affect women and girls, but also men and boys. When I first read the book, I was a little skeptical of this claim about pornography, because pornography had always been framed in my experience as this right to consume or read pornography, and the general question was about freedom of speech. So this was a book that really knocked my socks off in many ways, which was that it had a whole new framework of seeing pornography as an industry, and the implications of seeing it as an industry changed everything about the way that I thought of pornography. Not that it pushed me to be more anti, or although coming into contact with some of the videos that Gail pointed to did, in particular coming into contact with Max Hardcore, but just this whole way of thinking of a sex industry, which included the porn industry, the prostitution industry or system, and also took in lots of other areas, which in turn saturated our culture. We use the term often porn-soaked, and we often use porn-soaked of individual men, but our whole society is porn-soaked, and what that meant in particular for women and girls. So I'll just, after that brief introduction, turn over to Lierre, and who will continue, and then we'll go back and forwards between ourselves as well.
So I met Gail in, I think, 1987. She hadn't been in the United States very long, and she was just finishing up her PhD, which was on pornography and violence against women. We did a lot of street activism together, a lot of protest demonstrations. We actually trashed a porn store together once. That was one of the best days of my life. You need to know that women used to have riots against this stuff. And then we tried to pass the Dworkin-McKinnon ordinance, the anti-porn ordinance in Massachusetts. So that was another kind of activism we did. And then I was in Stop Porn Culture with her, and there was a small group of us traveled all over the country and tried to train people in a feminist analysis of porn. And Gail, along with Rebecca Wisnan and Bob Jensen, had written a whole new slideshow. We all had our own slideshows, but once the internet hit, it was a completely different landscape. So all that work had to be redone, and tried to get people to understand what was coming, because it was a tsunami wave, honestly, that hit the culture with the internet. So all of that happened. And then Gail is really a world expert in pornography and what it has done to us and to our culture. And she has testified in front of government bodies the world over, trying to get them to take this seriously. So she is an amazing human being. She's also just personally very warm and wonderful and generous. So I'm sad that she can't be here today, but her book is still, even though it's a little bit old now, it is absolutely worth reading, groundbreaking, disturbing, and still all very true. So I'm glad that we're doing this one today. So here's a quote, the first quote from the book. "One thing is certain, we are in the midst of a massive social experiment. Only the laboratory here is our world, and the effects will be played out on people who never agreed to participate. The architects of the experiment are the pornographers, a group of mostly men who are out to maximize their profits, to create markets, find products that sell, invest in R&D, and develop long-term business plans. In short, and as this book will show, they are businessmen from start to finish, not innovators committed to our sexual freedom." So this book is not a book about how pornography is bad. That's a given. The book is about how this horrible industry has taken over our culture, and the basic idea of what we consider to be sex has completely changed because of this industry. So that's what the book is about. And there's no images in the book, but there are some very gruesome descriptions that you do have to get through. So I'm just warning you, we've got a little bit of that in this presentation. I tried to keep it to, adult roar. I didn't want to overwhelm you all this morning, but you do have to understand how bad it is to come to grips with what it's done to us. So that's sort of my trigger warning, I guess. Okay, so porn is now so deeply embedded in our culture, it's become synonymous with sex to such a point that to criticize porn is to get slapped with the label anti-sex. And I'm including this quote in here because I think a lot of women have found this analogy that Gail likes to use to be very helpful. And she says that it's like if you criticize McDonald's for their exploitive labor practices, for destruction of the environment, its impact on diet and health, you don't get accused of being anti-food or anti-eating, right? Everyone understands this is an industry and it's an industrial product that has a huge impact on us and on our culture. And you're allowed to say that there's a critique of McDonald's without being accused of being anti-food or anti-eating. And she said it's the same thing with porn. They're commodifying, it's industrializing human desire. It's a very certain kind of desire. And they've done this incredible job of selling this product as being about sex when it's really a very specific kind of sex. And so, we're allowed to have a critique of this. And it's not that we are, quote, anti-sex. It's this industrially constructed product that we're against. So again, there's going to be some hard language in all of this. So she's been studying porn for over 2 decades. Nothing prepared me for how quickly hardcore, cruel porn would come to dominate the internet. So those of us who are over a certain age, we witnessed this in real life, and it's been a kind of horrifying few decades. She could see the images getting harder and harder, but they were still a long way from the brutality that is now commonplace in gonzo porn. The internet caused this revolution, but in my travels across the country, I find there are many people, especially women and older generations, completely unaware of what is going on. And this is why I've decided to include in this book the detailed, explicit descriptions of what is now considered mainstream porn. In some cases, it is simply not possible to describe the images without using the language of porn. Such language is used sparingly, only when necessary. But we do have to face up to how bad this is. So this is, her warning to some of the stuff that you're gonna have to see. And when she talks about how this has taken over, I just want you to understand like the level of complete domination this industry now has. The pornography sites are bigger than all of this combined: Netflix, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. If you can imagine how much those things have influenced your life, porn is bigger than all of those combined. Close to 1/3 of all downloads in the US are from a porn site. In 2019, the uploads to Pornhub, every minute, enough content to fill the memory of every single cell phone on the planet. Every minute. That's how much porn men are using. That's how much they're making. That's how much they're consuming. 88% of the most popular films contain physical aggression, like just out and out violence against women. So this is what has saturated the culture now.
Could I just
In
interrupt
fact, images.
a second?
Go ahead,
Oh,
Helen, you got something.
sorry.
Jump in.
I don't know if everybody's come across the term gonzo porn, just that you just mentioned then. And I know that when I first read the book, I'd never seen that term, and I kind of didn't really know what it is. So I don't know whether that, but yeah, it's everything's gonzo porn now, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and
Most of it.
gonzo means there's no plot. It's just cutting right to the quote action. So it's just
And hard
it's
and
just little
brutal.
film after little film of women being horribly debased, hurt, humiliated,
Mm,
um, every kind of every possible way that you could hurt a woman sexually, and it's just there instantly. There's no pretense that there's a story. It's just a woman laid bare in a terrible situation with men doing things to her that no
yeah.
human body should have to endure, and it's just minute after minute of this. And that's gonzo porn. So there's no pretense of anything else, and that's what dominates the internet now. So that's what it is. A lot of what's commonplace was non-existent a couple of decades ago. As the market becomes saturated and consumers become increasingly bored and desensitized, pornographers are avidly searching for ways to differentiate their products from others. And Gail spends a lot of time reading their trade publication, which is AVN, Adult Video News, and they talk about this quite openly, that where are we going to go next? We've done everything to women we can possibly do. They're already bored. What's next? And the question is why? Like, how does this actually happen to human beings? So this is from an article I wrote, but anything tied to sexual response will feel not just natural but primal. Arousal lights up the limbic system, a part of the brain so ancient it's found in all vertebrates. It also shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which is what heroin does. So it shuts off the part of your brain that actually analyzes things, that organizes your emotions. There's a surge of dopamine and endorphins that produces euphoria, followed by oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. Every area of the brain involved in sex is, according to neuroscientist Barry Komisarek, active, activated maximally. There's no stronger endogenous stimuli. So this is what's happening when men use porn. It's a biochemical experience as well that is extremely powerful. And this is what we're up against when we're trying to fight porn. So this is from Dr. Robert Lustig, his book, The Hacking of the American Mind, which I highly recommend. The difference between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is short-lived, it's visceral, so it's very physical. You feel pleasure in your body. It's experienced alone. It can only be experienced alone. You are the only person in your body, in your nervous system. You can achieve it with substances. It leads to addiction, and ultimately, it's about dopamine in our brains. And happiness is completely different. It's long-lived. It's about giving to other people. You experience it often in a group. You don't get it through substance. You can't get addicted to happiness, and that's because it's created by serotonin. And the difference between dopamine and serotonin, and the reason I'm getting into this is because I really want us to understand how bad the situation is. They really are inside people's brains with this. Both dopamine and serotonin are neurotransmitters, but dopamine by its nature, it's excitatory. So when it bumps into the next neurotransmitter, the next neuron in line, it excites it. Okay. And neurons can die when they're overexcited. So that neuron will then shut down its dopamine receptors so that it doesn't die. It blocks dopamine from exciting it anymore. So what we experience is we get a hit from some substance and then we get high, but we've triggered this inevitable crash because there's this regulation that happens. Now we don't have enough dopamine, so we crave more of whatever that substance is, just so that we can feel normal, never mind high again. And that's called tolerance. You're building tolerance to whatever that substance is. And you go through enough rounds of this substance, and eventually your dopamine receptors will start to die. And that's full blown addiction. And then you need more and more and more of this substance. Serotonin is exactly the opposite. It's actually inhibitory. So it doesn't stimulate that next neuron. In fact, it calms it down. It gives it a little bit of a rest. Serotonin doesn't downregulate receptors. You can't get addicted to happiness. You can get addicted to pleasure by whatever substance. And this is what's happened to the brains of men across the world. They are now addicted to this. And there's a lot of debate about this amongst feminists. I used to be on the anti side that this was not an addiction, but I don't think we're going to get as far as we need to get unless we recognize how they have indeed hijacked our brains across the culture with these images, with these experiences that men are having. It's very intense, and if we don't recognize, I think that they know this. This is the thing about the porn industry. They know more about addiction than any of us will ever know, and they know exactly what they're doing to hijack the human brain with this. So I think we need to get up to speed and realize that this is the situation that we're in. So to ensure that this is an accurate reflection of all porn available, she just types porn into Google and to see what's there. And you click on some of the sites that are on the very first page. So she's not cherry picking here. I think that's her point. And these are the things that you will find immediately. And it's all really horrible. So it's penetration of women by 3 or more men all at the same time, what's called double anal. So there's 2 penises inside a woman's body, double vagina, same thing. Gagging, this stuff is really disturbing. A woman has a penis thrust so far down her throat she gags or she vomits. This is all part of the excitement for the men. What's called ass to mouth, the penis goes directly from the woman's anus into her throat. Um, the men will leave comments about how amazing it is because you can see fecal matter on the penis. Like it's really, really horrible stuff. And then ultimately bukkake, where a whole bunch of men will ejaculate on a woman's face, on her body in various ways. And then sometimes women have to drink semen. This is absolutely normal in porn. Um, this is the world that they have created with this. So a lot of women have these terrible experiences in life and they don't understand where it comes from. And this is absolutely normal now that young boys as old as 11, 12 years old now are having this as their first sexual experience, is watching these horrifying things get done to women. And it is just utterly normalized. So this is the one really gruesome example I'm going to read you. There's not a lot more like this in this presentation. The one advertising, a woman named Laura, tells the reader, "The last thing we needed here was a vomiting girl, but this time it was close. Stopping is not our style, so she was grabbed by the head and face fucked as if there was no tomorrow. She tried hard to swallow, but there was too much muck, and the bitch had no real choice but to take it all." And of course, her love tunnel looked like a train passed through. So we'll get right off of that. But this is the level of just commonplace, everyday, profound misogyny that has taken over the culture. Helen, do you want to add anything here? I'm going on, but you might have some comments.
Yeah, just one thing. I mean, I think I would slightly differ from you about the importance um of the physical experience. But I'd probably just more emphasize, this would be a sort of a small point of disagreement. And I think it's a little bit of disagreement with Gail too. But I'd more emphasize what they're being addicted to, so that they're not just being addicted to, girls with their finger in their mouth, sort of looking off into the distance, but they're being addicted to really, as those examples or as those kind of quotations show, really brutal, cruelty. And so it's passed over from, I mean, it still is sex, but it's passed over into the realm of just cruelty and brutality. But also the other thing I think is mockery, that it's a form of, when the last example of the girl, everybody in that set who was watching that would be laughing.
Yeah.
One of the examples that I'd add there is that when I did I was asked to participate in a panel held by the Censorship Panel Board in Australia, Film and Literature Classification Board in Australia, and they showed us a clip from a film of the manufacture of pornography, and the girls were all, and this is important, I think, the girls were all given, and they're always girls, sorry, no matter how old they are, the girls were given a safe word, which was their word to be able to use when it got too much for them. And the porn industry makes a lot of that. They say, well, we have all the usual safeguards and that sort of stuff. But their safe word was chicken. I'm a chicken. And so if a woman wanted to opt out of being treated in this extremely cruel way, which they try, people working in the industry, they try to hang on as long as possible, because they know that if they don't hang on, they're going to get sacked. They're going to say, you're no good for us. We'll go for the girls who can take it. And so their safe word was, I'm a chicken. Now, that's so indicative to me. It's such a little kind of example, but so indicative of what this is all about, of characterizing. And when you said, I'm a chicken, everybody fell about laughing again, because it was so funny that women, the contortions of women, and women are just so hilarious, they mock us, they laugh at us, and that's their way of being cruel. So people often talk about porn films as humorous, we laugh at porn. Well, yeah, I'm sure they do. And what they're laughing at is us. They're laughing at us and at the spectacle of us being degraded and dominated and subordinated and humiliated and made to do those things. Otherwise, we're chickens. And somebody was mentioning in the chat, we're uncool. And no one wants to be uncool. Yeah, thanks, Lierre.
Well, and I did a similar experiment this week because I knew this seminar was coming up. And so I went to Amazon Prime Video and what do you want me to watch, Amazon? What are you going to show me? In terms of just pop culture, what do you think I should be watching? And I watched two things that are just regular old things from Amazon Prime, nothing to do with porn. And both of them within the first 10 minutes, I could count the number of times that these sort of humorous references to porn were made. One of them was a show that was clearly aimed at teenage girls. And after the 10-minute mark, I had to turn it off because I was so angry. And the other one was meant for adults. And in that one, the sneering, laughing porn reference was literally to cannibal porn. An image of a little film on this woman's laptop of a woman being tied up on a large tray and basted with oil and about to be put in an oven. And this, in the end, was supposed to be a joke. By the end of the show, you were supposed to realize this was a joke. But it was real porn, and we all had to really watch it if you watched the show. And the show had nothing to do with pornography, but this is this constant erosion into pop culture of the worst kinds of sexual activities that men can think of to do to women. We have gone absolutely to the bottom. What is worse than like cannibal porn at this point? And indeed, to be the cool girl, you were supposed to laugh at it. The whole thing was a joke by the end of that episode. Yeah, it's all just really, really horrible. There's nowhere else to go at this point. So, and then in this point on this slide, she's saying is that it's no matter how much we want to pretend that this is something to do with women, it doesn't. He controls everything. The man has all the power. He controls the nature of the act, the pacing, the timing, and the power that men have over women in porn sex is encoded into the sex acts and the physical and verbal abuse that accompanies them. So this is not about any kind of love or connection or what sex should be. It is absolutely just about sheer domination of women.
Yeah,
So
Jane was.
then go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, Jane said, sadism, absolutely thrilling. Yeah, and that's,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. So
it's.
then she starts to talk about how this happened. So there's a whole chapter on how an industry started in the United States. So Hugh Hefner is the man who really got this off the ground, and he started grooming the culture. The print pornography market was dominated by cheap, under-the-counter, kind of grubby magazines that you might have to go to a special store to get. But he saw the quote potential in all of this in the 1950s, and he didn't want to just create a porn magazine. He wanted to break down the boundary across the culture. So he tried to put together a more tasteful photos that every man would want, but it included an entire lifestyle that he was selling. So in order to get porn into the culture, he had to create this whole other sort of world and this magazine that was about grooming men to buy sort of upscale products so that he could get these advertisers for it. But really, the whole point was to break down the cultural boundaries, stopping porn from being accepted. And he did that. He was very successful at it. The whole chapter explains sort of step by step how he did that. And it was a very quick slide from Hugh Hefner into Larry Flint. And so these two magazines, their success is measurable not only in terms of sales and advertising, but the role they played in laying the economic, cultural, and legal foundation. Legal is important here for the contemporary multi-billion dollar a year market. Playboy was especially important for today's high-end feature studios. It helped create the idea that porn could be classy and tasteful, and normal people should accept this. But for the gonzo type of porn, Hustler built the taste for it of just completely degraded women. That was what Larry Flint did. And I want everybody to remember Larry Flint started as a man who owned a strip club in Kentucky. That was the world he came out of, and that was the world he wanted everywhere across America. He sexually abused both of his daughters. They have been very brave coming forward talking about what he did to them. One of them was 12 years old. He made her strip at his strip club on stage for his friends. Tanya Flint is her name. So this is never just a joke, that it's never just sealed away in some imaginary world that men can create privately in their minds. It involves real women and sometimes real girls, their own daughters. Okay, there's no boundary here they're not willing to break. And Larry Flint was very good at breaking every cultural boundary that he could with Hustler. And then finally, here we are. Without these three magazines, Hustler, Penthouse, and Playboy, the porn industry would not be where it is today. Each publisher was willing to push the boundaries, and in so doing so, made pornography increasingly visible in mainstream pop culture. And so they worked together. They worked symbiotically to do this. The culture had been well groomed to accept pornography as part of everyday life, rather than as an industry that produces a system of images that debases and dehumanizes women and men both. So that's what that chapter is about, is just this is a business, and this is how these men created these markets for it. So then the next chapter, pornography becomes pop culture. So how the porn industry slid in and took over everything else that we consider pop culture. So the movies and just the general narrative of this. And so she goes over some of the ways that they did it in the 80s and into the 90s. Girls Gone Wild, Jenna Jameson, Vivid Entertainment, which was one of the big porn producers, and Howard Stern. A couple of other examples as well, but these are the main ones that she gets into. Girls Gone Wild is this horrible man, Joe Francis. And the thing about Girls Gone Wild was that it's supposed to be a documentation of reality. That was what he kind of built his industry on. And it's not supposed to be just a representative of it. It's supposed to be the real thing. So he goes around to college campuses and places where young people are on spring break where they can, drink a lot of alcohol and do crazy things. And it's suggesting that everyday women are sexually available because the whole thrill of this is that it's, the girl next door, and this is actually what she wants to do, and we're just going to document it. This is the nature of women, particularly young, pretty women. This is what they want to do, and we're just going to film it. Behind the scenes, of course, it's a totally different situation. Gail was involved in a number of lawsuits. He was actually using underage girls sometimes. He didn't care that they were only 15 years old. And the women who came out of this are some of them just permanently traumatized by these experiences. They were stalked in real life by men. Their lives were completely derailed. He did time. Joe Francis did time in jail for in prison for some of what he did, but nowhere near enough. Um, anyway, it's akin to watching a female lose her virginity. This is supposed to be the first time the girl has performed sex on camera. They are very young, they're barely adults. And what she loses is her good girl status. So she shifts from being the girl next door to the girl who is just as slutty as other women in porn. That's the entire narrative of Girls Gone Wild. And the Girls Gone Wild videos were extremely popular in the kind of pedophile world because it's that narrative that they're selling. The girls, quote, the girls, the young women have to be coaxed to do it. And you'll hear the men behind the camera sort of walking her through, grooming her, you know, telling her what to do next. They're often, you can tell they're drunk, they're high, they're on drugs. They're absolutely horrifying videos to watch. And Joe Francis did his bit to groom the culture to accept this. So this was a main way that the porn industry with through the internet kind of took over was Girls Gone Wild. Jenna Jameson, she was the first crossover star, so she was in all these pornography in all these videos and whatnot. And then she was the first one to really break through into pop culture. She wrote a book called How to Make Love as a Porn Star and How to Make Love as like a Porn Star. Um, it's sort of her autobiography. Um, she's supposed to be very glamorous. You could, as a young girl, you could want to be like her. That's sort of the image that she has. So she's got this all-American look. She's supposed to be, quote, wholesome. When you read her autobiography, though, it actually does show some of the truth about this. Her mother died when she was 2. She was raised by a father who really didn't care about her. Very chaotic early life. She was gang raped, beaten, and left for dead as a teenager. Then she was raped by her abusive boyfriend's uncle. Eventually, her boyfriend pushed her to the stripping industry, so she went on to become a stripper. And of course, she gets addicted to drugs, and all of that is actually in this story that she, in her autobiography. So it's not even like perfectly cleansed from the narrative. It just doesn't seem to matter that this is what it takes to get women into the porn industry. But she was huge. That's this whole thing about being a porn star. That's what Jenna Jameson was. That was sort of her. That was how she sort of made this claim across porn culture. Then there's Vivid Entertainment. These were very popular porn videos that became a website. This was the way that they sort of broke women into this because this kind of porn was made for couples because there was like a story involved. So a lot of men are very upfront about the fact that they would use a vivid video, a vivid thing online to get their girlfriends to watch it. And so this is how they sold it to women was through, and it was huge. The amount of um, the amount of sort of market domination that Vivid had was enormous. Um, okay, and then Howard Stern, of course. This guy was the second highest paid celebrity in the world in the year 2006. His income was $302 million a year, and he relentlessly pushed porn on his show. He had a lot of porn stars on his show. He had a lot of key players in the industry come on his show. It was like this never-ending rollout of more and more porn. He kept trying to get people to just accept this as the new normal. He would say horrible things to women when they came on his show. He's absolutely a misogynist and a bully. His big thing was trying to get them to use a dildo on camera on his show. Various women were pressured into doing this. One of them, if you've never seen this, it's absolutely horrifying. But of course, Buck Angel, who's supposed to be a wonderful, somehow gender critical because she doesn't want it done to children. You need to watch this if you've never seen it. It's completely horrifying what she's willing to do on his show. just the utter debasement of women that he was able to push. So that's, kind of the big four of how they got the porn industry to be accepted across porn culture. And, some of us were alive for this, and it was horrifying to watch, sort of day by day, year by year, how much further they were getting across the culture. So that's that whole chapter was is about porn culture becoming popular culture, and
Gail's
porn is big business. Go ahead,
yeah,
Helen. Go ahead.
sorry, Lierre. Just one thing. Gail's writing before Pornhub, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, Pornhub
Yeah.
hadn't happened yet. Yeah.
So don't forget the sort of really strong role that Pornhub came to play. But it's not that Gail didn't notice it. It was just it wasn't there when she wrote the book. She needs to write a second edition. So yeah.
Yeah, this needs to come out as or a second book entirely, honestly. But her point is that this is big business and that it has huge implications across the culture. So one thing is the technological innovation. Most of us don't think about this. The reason we have cameras on our phones and the reason that the resolution on our cameras is so good is because of porn. It's literally the porn industry did that because they knew if they could deliver porn onto a tiny little handheld object, men would watch it 24/7 around the globe, and they do. And that's what drove the technology was men's desire for this material and the idea that men could also make a lot of money at it. So those, that whole industry, that's what drove that. So that's why you have a camera on your phone. It's not so you can take cute pictures of your dogs. It's because men have wanted to watch women get debased on the train and at work and at school and everywhere they went. They wanted to be able to carry it around with them. So they did that. Also, all the ways that corporate America is involved in this. It's this whole extensive value chain, the producers and the distributors, but also the bankers, the software, the hotels, all of it, the internet companies, everything is wrapped up in porn. It's an enormous global, interlinked web of businesses. So you put in your hand, and what you're going to pull out is all of corporate domination of the planet. There's porn is absolutely a part of it. So that's one of the main themes of the book as well. It's not just innocent people trying to have fun online. So then there's this chapter about how it socializes the user. And so they have to get men to completely desensitize themselves to the fact that women are human. So there's all of this horrible language all the time. Women are never just called women. We're called bitches and sluts and whores and all of this. They have to erode empathy. Um, and there's a conflict in many men, and you'll see this in the porn, that there are women in their lives that they care about. So this whole other kind of creature has to be constructed that is not my wife and not my daughter and not the women that my mother, it's not the women that I care about. This has to be very clearly demarcated from the women that they know and love. The most obvious technique that the pornographers employ is to verbally segregate this group by calling us cunts, whores, sluts, all of the rest of it. In Gonzo, a woman is never referred to as a woman. She is instead reduced to a sexual object. In porn, sex is framed as not just consensual, but as something that the woman seeks out because she loves it. She loves to be sexually used. This is also a method for lessening any guilt the user might feel as he can reassure himself that she is not being hurt, or if she is, it's what she wants. So there's an entire class of women. This is their nature to be doing this. You're not hurting them when you do these horrendous things to them. And this woman is not really a woman. She's this subhuman creature, not at all like these other women in my life. And that's how they get men over that hump, is to say that there's this other group of people, not quite human, not like other women, and you can do this stuff to them and it doesn't matter. In porn, the women's lack of human qualities often results in men's ability to see just how violent the sex act is. No matter how cruel the sex, the one question I can always count on hearing from any man after my presentation is, women enjoy what they are doing, so why is porn a problem? Now, the men, of course, have no empirical evidence to support this. It's just their observations of the porn that they masturbate to. When I ask them if they'd like to see the women that they know in this, they're quick to respond that their loved ones are different from the women in porn. Their women would never choose such a job. So that these women are acting and may have come to porn not so much through choice, but due to a lack of alternatives is rarely considered because this premise threatens to puncture the fantasy world created by both pornographer and user. So this is how they get it done, right? This is how the sausage is made. The ability to keep porn women separate from the women they date and hook up with, it's eroded. The more men watch porn, the more the stories become part of the social construction of reality. And she talks about many times throughout the book all the stories that women come to her with, and it is clear that these men are using porn semi-constantly, and the women have no idea why the men want to do these terrible things to them. Um, so these industrially produced porn images do indeed seep into their intimate lives as much as they're trying not to let that happen. It does, of course, happen. And it's wrecking men. It's absolutely wrecking men as human beings. So one key factor leading to this level of disconnection is that porn trains men to become desensitized to women's pain. And she's got all kinds of examples of men on these websites where they talk about the porn that they're watching and they leave comments. And so she's got lots of different comments from the men. This is about Max Hardcore, who, if you don't know who he was, he's dead now, but he absolutely tortured women and broke a lot of the cultural boundaries to make this stuff very acceptable, as especially anal sex was his thing. We have a lot to thank Max Hardcore for. But anyway, so there's men watching these videos and they talk about how at first they found the material sickened. The men say they were shell shocked, sickened, and dirty watching this. But then he says his tastes moved on and he began to enjoy the scenes. It would appear that this man, Anon is his handle, he became desensitized to the women's pain since it's impossible to enjoy hardcore's images if you have any empathy for the women. They look so distressed and in such pain that it feels like you are watching actual torture. And so the men themselves talk about how they become desensitized to this material. So by the time they first encounter porn, most men have internalized the sexist ideology of our culture and of porn rather than being an aberration. It actually cements and consolidates their ideas about sexuality. And it gives them an intense amount of sexual pleasure, this material. This framing of sexist ideology as sexy and hot gives porn a pass to deliver messages about women that in any other form would seem completely unacceptable. And again, it's part of this is because it bypasses the frontal lobes. It stimulates the pleasure centers of the brain. The amygdala gets involved. You've got that dopamine reaction. It's just shutting down the part of your brain that can actually analyze and manage your emotions. And the pornographers know this. They talk about it very openly. They know what they're doing to men's brains by presenting this material. And Gail has this great paragraph in here. Imagine what would happen if suddenly we saw a slew of dramas and sitcoms on television where, say, Blacks or Jews were repeatedly referred to in a racist or anti-Semitic way, where they got their hair pulled, their faces slapped, choked by white men pushing foreign objects into their mouths. My guess is that there would be an outcry, and the images would not be defended on the grounds that they were just fantasy, but rather would be seen for what they are, depictions of cruel acts that one group is perpetrating against another group. By wrapping the violence in sexual cloak, porn renders it invisible, and those of us who protest the violence are consequently defined as anti-sex, not anti-violence. And she's exactly right. We all know there is no way they could do these things to any other group of people and have it be acceptable, but they can do it to women as much as they want. Helen, you want to jump in at all? I'm doing all the talking.
Oh, no, it's fine. Just one thing I would say that it strikes me is this is what we've seen is a big change also in ways of understanding pornography as well as what is pornography is. But one of the things that used to be said about pornography was if a man reads pornography, again, the reading kind of thing, if a man reads pornography, there is a danger that he will sexually assault, rape a woman. And so there was a phrase that early pornography feminists used to use, which was pornography is a theory, rape is a practice. Andrea Dworkin actually changed that. She said, oh, pornography is a theory, pornography is a practice. And, you know, our sex becomes, even sex between ourselves, ordinary people outside of being filmed, etc., is what I mean by ourselves, becomes pornographic. You know, we are pornographicized, where the whole culture becomes groomed and pornographicized. But one thing about that too is that along with that, pornography as a theory, rape as a practice, there was this idea that pornography was a kind of fantasy, wasn't real, and was a theory, you know, like a theory, unreal. But the point is that there's a point there. It's not a fantasy in a sense. Pornography is real. It's not something that exists inside somebody's head. But in another way, it's a way that it makes us, as you say, not because we ever consented or agreed to this, but it makes us, regardless of what we want or might choose or might desire, it makes us into men's fantasy of who we are. And then they treat us like that. So fantasy is a real thing too. You know, it's not that these things exist off somewhere in the ether somewhere. We become men's fantasy, and then they make us into that. We are not women anymore. We're the object of the man's fantasy. So yeah, it's a kind of don't let anybody tell you that pornography is a fantasy in the sense of just not real, I think.
Yeah, and to that point,
That's another thing
Gail and
that
I,
Gail makes clear as well, is that, you know, this is an industry that works in certain ways, and real money changes hands and real people get hurt in it. Sorry to interrupt you, Lierre. Yeah.
Gail and I were invited to a Supermax prison in Connecticut to interview 7 incarcerated sex offenders who were willing to talk to us about how they got from here to there. The woman who was in charge of that prison, the warden, reached out to Gail because she was so disturbed by the sea change that she was seeing amongst these incarcerated men, that it used to be when they came to the prison and they were in for especially sexually assaulting a child or child porn charges, that they were incredibly ashamed of what they had done. Um, and they, of course, had to be kept separate from the general population. And all of a sudden, the men were arriving and they had no shame at all. They felt completely entitled to this material, and they weren't ashamed of what they had done. So this level of entitlement was suddenly seen in this population, and this woman was terrified. She said, "This is very bad. What is happening? Somebody needs to do something because this is coming now. This is going to wreck us." And she did everything she could to make these interviews, these men available to us to interview. And I wasn't going to let Gail go alone into this prison, so we spent a day in the prison with the sex offenders, and it was a day. I just so many I don't even know. There's so many emotions about that day, but there were 7 of them that were willing to talk to us, and, yeah, they talked very openly about their use of, pornography on the internet. It was a very short slide for some of them. I had assumed it would take a few years to get kind of from here to there, but some of them it was 2 or 3 months. And it's the volume of the material. You can sit there all day and watch thousands of images. The desensitization was almost overnight for some of them. And none of them were actually pedophiles. None of them actually what they call the Able scale. None of them would have registered as actual men who were sexually attracted to children rather than adults. It didn't matter. The porn industry was able to deliver up a steady stream of images of younger and younger women, and then eventually actual children. Thousands of these images can be consumed in a really short period of time. And by the time 2 or 3 months had gone by, these men were perfectly willing to do things to children, to have sexual fantasies about children, and then some of them had contact offenses, so they actually had hurt actual children. Some of them were non-contact offenses. But hearing them talk about this was just completely horrifying. They weren't looking for child porn. It came to them over the internet because the algorithm will do that. And they get bored really quickly and they need the next thing. They need that next hit for their brains to feel normal. And it was just a horrifying thing listening to them talk about this. And one of them, I'll never forget, he was very, very clear that the culture had done the grooming for him. He had a 10-year-old stepdaughter. She would come home from school, and clearly on their phones, these children were watching porn. And she had weird questions she would ask him about things like, what is this and what does this mean? And at one point, she asked him, "What does a penis taste like?" And he said, "The culture did the grooming for me." That was his line. That's what he said. He was well aware what was happening, and the children having access to this material was getting this girl ready for what he did to her. So that was a fairly horrible day. But this is where we are now across the culture.
Yes.
Go ahead. You want to say something?
Oh, just to agree. And
Yeah.
again, I think that we don't, well, I suppose the only thing I would say is that we tend to say that child pornography is a separate sort of thing. So we say everybody's against child pornography, but the difficult problems are with adult pornography. Once you use Gail's framework of the pornography industry, they're just different parts of the same industry. And, you know, that, as you say, people migrate between them, you know, freely. They're not separate.
So then she has a whole chapter about how this is grooming women. So how women are being forced to accept this pornographic narrative, these pornographic practices, pornographic sex acts. So all the ways that, you know, the pop culture stuff, women aren't necessarily consuming this material on their own, though they are more and more, which is really horrifying. But the way that pop culture has now socialized a whole generation to think this is normal. And she talks about, for instance, that show Sex and the City, that pornography comes up over and over again as a way to groom women into it. So it's men like to watch the porn as they have sex, men who are aroused by female urination. This is straight out of porn. I mean, when I was a kid, nobody did this. When I was a teenager, this was not a thing that anybody would have even thought of. And here it is on one of the most popular shows on television, and the women think it's fine. They're willing to do it. Men who want to have group sex, men who can get aroused only by masturbating to porn, men who are into S&M, men who want anal sex, men who are willing to only have hookup sex and not a relationship. So she goes through these different episodes on this show where the women think it's cool, they think it's fun, they get used to it, they want to try it. Things that should be absolutely horrifying are not. So, you know, for instance, this Charlotte finds her husband using porn in the masturbating to porn in the bathroom. Uh, Pornography use is the #1 cause of divorce in the United States. This is straight from the Family Lawyers Association. This is what they say. The lawyers in charge of divorce will tell you pornography is the #1 reason that couples are getting divorced. And instead of showing this for the violation that it is to her relationship and the marriage vows, she glues pictures of herself into the magazine. So she's willing to play along. So Sex and the City, women capitulate to pornography, it invades their sex lives, but in their desire to get a man and keep him, they were willing to do anything, even if they felt uncomfortable about it. So, for instance, Carrie decides that she'll go ahead and, you know, experiment with urinating on her partner, blah, blah. So this is how they got women to accept all of this stuff is through shows like this. And then she's got a chapter on racism, which is really important for us to understand. In porn, women of color are relegated to gonzo porn, the genre that has no glamour, no security, no chic status. They don't have fan clubs, they don't have websites. And it's just the worst kind of body punishing sex that there is. And in pornography, women's bodies are racialized. There's in the all white porn, no one ever refers to the man's penis as a white cock or, you know, women as quote white pussy. But the moment there's a person of color on the scene, everything becomes racialized. So the race of the performer is depicted in ways that makes the woman more of quote a slut, and the black men are way more hypermasculized. They're shown as just absolutely just bestial, violent, you know, very cruel, you know, animalistic kind of sexuality. And so women of color, are particularly useful as a group to exploit in gonzo porn because it's the most debased and dehumanized porn. The porn performer then embodies two subordinate categories. So Asian women are shown as utterly submissive, passive, silent, tiny, childlike women. And for Black women, it to me, this is just really the worst. Um, that what's done to Black women is it's absolutely the worst kinds of porn, but it's the way that the the Blackness is hypersexualized into um, I don't it's just like the extra levels of debasement that can be done to Black women. And Helen, you talked earlier about the kind of cruelty and the humor that women are laughed at in porn. And this is really accentuated when Black women are used in pornography. It's always about her poverty and her desperation. And there's this really sneering sort of humor that's used, that the men are supposed to have this sneering attitude toward women's poverty, that she's driven to this because of poverty is part of the narrative, and this makes it sexier. And this is a whole nother reason that she can be sneered at. And if you watch enough of this material, if you have the heart for it, this narrative, you'll see very clearly what I'm talking about. That because she's Black, she's poor, And this, sort of makes more, it's like, it's more debasement for her and more reason to sneer at her and laugh at her is her economic desperation. And just the cruelty of this is really just kind of soul crushing, honestly, to see this
Right.
be done. And the fact
And
that the left brought this to us is, um, the left is supposed to care about poverty and racism, and they don't. Not really. Not at the end of the day. Not if they're masturbating to this material. They can't. And this is why this famous quote from Andrea Dworkin in her book Pornography, where she says, "Pornography is the graveyard where the left has gone to die." And I've never forgotten that line from the first moment that I read it. And this is what she's talking about, is the racism, the way that racial cruelty is sexualized and found enjoyable by men on the left is kind of unbearable and really brings a lie. Which world do we want, boys? Is it the world where women are poor and desperate, and Black women especially are going to be sneered at in their economic desperation? Or do we really want a world where,
mm,
we're going to fight this stuff and we're going to make this better world where nobody has to do this for a living because we all have enough food and a place to live and, heat when we need it, and basic human rights are, supported and validated? Like, which world is it? Because you can't have both. You're going to have to pick at some point. And they're picking this other world. They are picking the world where Black women are sneered at because they're desperate and on the streets. So go ahead, Helen, you got something?
I was just going to say one thing is, this goes right back to Playboy as well. One of the most popular parts of Playboy was the cartoons,
The cartoons. Yeah.
and the cartoons were often racist. The cartoons were always misogynist, and so when men said I buy Playboy for the interviews, a lot of men just bought them for the cartoons so they could laugh at women, and at the sex of women again. So it's humiliation. It's not. I mean, they get pleasure. It is pleasure, but it's pleasure out of humiliation. I think that really struck home to Hustler. Yes, you're right, Julia. Hustler also had disgusting cartoons, including a famous long-running battle with Andrea Dawkins about the cartoons that they had of her as a lesbian. And lesbians are very funny too, of course. They're made to be laughed at by men. And so I think it's just, you can see through Gail's thing, you can really see the progression from Playboy to what it has become. There was no other path to take. This is the path that was always on the cards with them. And I don't know, somebody was saying, I've had enough. I think, yeah, I think that's when people say, what can we do? I think one of the things we can do is say, we've had enough.
Yeah. And then children, of course, the final taboo. We have all these examples in pop culture of the childified woman, so women dressed up as little girls, and then the adultified child, so actual children dressed up to look like adults, wearing red lipstick and sexy outfits. And this is in pop culture. We're not even talking about the porn, but again, how pop culture has become porn culture. So this is, these examples that she's got from, real life magazines and whatnot of very famous people, participating in this. And then in the law, that the whole realm of the legal stuff in the United States, we did have this attempt in 1996, the Child Porn Prevention Act, and it didn't just make child porn illegal; it made anyone pretending to be a child. So any representation that was supposed to be a child, even if the person in the photo was not a child, that also they tried to make that illegal, and that was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So this opened the floodgate to all of this in the United States. That was declared, it's too much of an infringement on the First Amendment. So you can now dress up very tiny, very young looking, legally aged women to look like small children and do all of this stuff in porn, and there's not a problem with it legally. So there's the whole narrative that goes along with this kind of material. They so the it's this one man says it's knowing innocence, which he defines as the illusion of innocence giving way to unbridled sexuality. Essentially, this is the throwback of the Madonna and the whore. This man is saying this, like he gets what he's looking at and he's doing it anyway. Therein lies the vast majority of my attraction to this genre. The pleasure is in watching this sweet, cute, petite Madonna being coaxed, encouraged, and manipulated by adult men into revealing the horror that lies beneath the illusionary innocence. The pornographers reveal their understanding of the nature of this pleasure when they guarantee that, quote, the girls the users are watching are, quote, first timers having their first sexual experience. So, of course, they have to add fresh girls every week. How, after all, does one defile an already defiled girl? So you get to see her looking nervous. She's giggling, smiling. And then, of course, she's encouraged off camera to do these various things. In this kind of porn, they rarely show men doing things to the young women. The women themselves are supposed to be, basically eager to expose themselves, to masturbate, to do various things to their bodies. If there was actually an adult man in the scene, it would sort of break the narrative for this level of porn. And eventually, of course, the men desensitized to this and they want to see harder and harder stuff. And then eventually some of them do slide over into actual child porn. I did this
Lierre,
search yesterday.
sorry,
Go ahead.
Lierre,
Go ahead.
Lierre, we have to stop because it's
Okay.
11:01. We're
We're
late.
done. I'm so sorry.
But you have to wind up. We could
Okay.
continue later.
Okay.
So what, maybe wind up, have a last few bits to say.
Absolutely. So there's all kinds of other stuff in here. Get involved. You can join Gail's organization, which is called Culture Reframed. You can join Fight the New Drug. They've got great amount of information. If you personally are having problems with pornography or somebody in your life is, as well as how to get involved politically to stop this. Here's Gail, Culture Reframed. You can, I was going to talk about Trafficking Hub. We did mention that. Layla Mickelwaite has done an extraordinary job tracking down Pornhub through her organization. Look into what she's done. She's had 2-3 years of this, and she's made a huge dent in the porn industry, and it's amazing to watch. And we all need to join what she's doing. Age verification laws. This is something that's happening in the United States, and it's again taking a huge bite out of their profits. And Wolf is involved in some of this now. So come to our conference in Santa Fe. It's next month. You can learn how to do all of this. We've got a plan. We want you involved. We are going to make a difference. That we are not powerless here. There are things we can do to stop this. I know it seems overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. And we're going to end with Andrea.